Okay. All right, sure. Speaker today is Dimitri Garder, CEO of Global Z. He's not just the CEO of Global Z, but involved in so many different elements of Bennington in the last decade since he graduated from UVM in about 91 or so, with a music degree, and came back to Bennington to work at his family's company. Plethora of knowledge about all things from economic development, entrepreneurship, Lightning Jar, the Putnam Project. He has a project he worked on, which I can't remember the name of, but I'm sure you'll your own special project. But wealth of knowledge about all things Bennington. Dimitri Garder.
And I think this is the third time I've spoken at this Rotary over the last few years, and I always appreciate the warm welcome that you provide, and good to see a lot of old friends in the room. So I'm afraid the AV here is being a little bit finicky, so I do have a presentation, but I'm going to be running it off of my laptop rather than the screen, so you're going to have to use your imaginations a little bit, but I'll talk through my points here. And if anything's unclear from the visuals, I'm happy to send this out to the group after the fact. So,
No, it's here.
can you folks hear okay? Great.
Yes.
All right.
Can you, actually, I'm sorry, there's a switch to turn the battery pack on.
Helps if I'm live, right? Okay, great, good. Good, so just a couple of quick words about my background, and then I'll jump into my talking points. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Global Z International. We're a global data management company located here in Bennington. We're going on our 30th anniversary this year, so yes, I had a lot more hair when I started this job than I do today. I am also the board director and co-founder of the Lightning Jar co-working space here in Bennington. I am an investor in the Putnam Block project, so I'm happy to answer any questions about that at the end. And I am also the founder and board director of the Bennington Idea Fund, which is a nonprofit fund to develop projects for local working families to help improve economic conditions for people in poverty. And I've got a number of other irons in the fire. I've got 3 little kids at home, and pretty active in the local community, and I love Bennington. It's where we call home. I've been here for 35 years, and it's a great place to be. So that's my background. I'm going to talk a little bit about my business, but mostly I wanted to give folks I like when I do these presentations to give folks some tools that you can use in a practical way for your own businesses. And I wanted to frame the context of my discussion around kind of changes in the world and how it's affecting businesses and how it's affecting workers, and what are some of the tools that are evolving out there that folks can use to react to some of these things. So I call the presentation Responding to Threats, Persevere or Pivot. And the concept of persevering or pivot comes from a text called The Lean Startup, which I'm going to talk about. And the idea there is, do you continue down the path of your current strategy, or do you pivot to a new strategy because it's time to make a change? And in the world of change, we're constantly pivoting if we want to survive. So I'll start with sort of the basic business model. This is the classic Porter's 5 forces model. So it talks about when you analyze an industry, what are the factors that impact whether it's a desirable industry or not. Everything in the 5 forces model talks about threats. You've got threats of new entrants, threats of substitutes, the bargaining power of buyers, the bargaining power of suppliers, right? So organizations are constantly exposed to all these threats, which also creates opportunity, but we need to find a way to react to these threats in such a way that we can continue to be viable. And I think this is particularly relevant today because as a nation, we're going through a lot of changes that we're trying to react to. As a community, we're going through a lot of changes as well. How do we survive these things? How does our downtown survive the change to an Amazon-driven retail model, for example? Those are really major challenges. These threats impact the workforce as well, not just businesses. And one of the ways that it's impacting the workforce is the traditional workforce model was based on that kind of pyramid hierarchy where you had top management, and then you had worker bees at the bottom in these individual silos, and then you have a layer of middle management in the middle that was sort of negotiate, bringing strategy down to the functional teams, and then report back up to top management. Well, that's really changed. And you can see that they call this now the snowman or the hourglass chart, where middle management has been hollowed out. So, those jobs are gone. You still have a top executive level in these organizations. But at the bottom of the organization, you have folks that are doing the work, and the middle management layer no longer provides that oversight and communication back and forth. It's caused teams to have to restructure to more self-managing structures and more cross-functional structures. So it's changing the skill set that people need in order to be competitive in the workforce. It's a major challenge for people that are struggling to make these transitions in the workforce. So there's transition happening everywhere. I've got an MBA, and it was a great experience, and I've been an entrepreneur for 30 years. I have not found a better tool for dealing with these things than this book and this model called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Eric Ries basically took the concept of lean manufacturing, which came from Deming and the Toyota manufacturing system, and applied it to the entrepreneurial world. And this has transformed my thinking about how I run my business and frankly how I do everything in my life. And I'll just talk a little bit about what the approach looks like and why it's relevant. And I believe that everybody in this room can use this to improve how they run their business. So one of the things it does is it eliminates the long cycle strategic planning process. So we have this myth of how you do a startup business is you create this big complex strategic plan, and then you go to market and you implement your plan. Well, there's a lot of evidence that shows that that's not a very effective way of doing things, because the strategic plan pretends that you know a lot of things that you don't actually know. And by the time you finish it, the target has moved, especially now that things are moving so fast. So this model is really being outdated very quickly in favor of fast iterations of test, measure, and change. So try something, measure whether it's working, and then adjust course. And do it as rapidly as possible and as many iterations as you can. And the faster your iterations are, the more impact you're going to have and the better success you'll have. And this has been proven in a number of areas. Basically, it comes from scientific method, the idea of test, measure, and change. It introduces this concept of MVP, or minimum viable product. By the way, this model is used by startups everywhere. If you're not following Lean Startup, you're not getting funded as an entrepreneur. So this has become standard practice. The idea of minimum viable product says, first of all, establish your hypothesis. So what is it that you're trying to prove? I think this feature is interesting to a customer. So you start with whatever that is. Or I think if I modify my marketing this way, it will improve my response. And then you implement the minimum product that can test the hypothesis. And this is hard for a lot of people to get their heads around, especially engineers who want to make it perfect. The idea is you want it to be the minimal effort possible to test. And anything beyond the minimal is considered waste. And the whole model of Lean is to get away from waste. So if you have extra features, you haven't proven them yet in the marketplace. How do you know that they're important? Just because an engineer thinks so doesn't make it so. So it's really a very minimalistic approach. And then you test it in the marketplace and you measure your customer reaction. And you measure that directly. And then you adjust. Did the customer like it? Did they not like it? They liked it, but they want it to be modified slightly. And then rinse and repeat. So that's your product development iteration. And this is being used really, really effectively. And I'll give you an example of that. And again, this all comes from Deming. So this is how, Deming applied scientific method to the manufacturing process 50, 60 years ago. It's still being used now in the startups communities. And what's so interesting about this Lean Startup model, which I always like to say, is that startups are not emulating large, successful legacy businesses. It's the other way around. Large, successful enterprises are emulating small startups in order to become more agile and more effective in the marketplace. GE hired Eric Ries after he created this model because they knew that they needed to become more entrepreneurial. It's a really, really easy read, and if you're in business, I think it's required reading in my mind. And here's just a simple example of how this type of MVP testing is being done in the marketplace. This is a screen from Quicken, which is the personal accounting software that I use. And I found that there were some features in the product that really were not meeting my needs. And one day I logged into the application and a pop-up came up that said, so we're looking to make feature changes to our product, but we'd like to know from you as a customer what are the feature changes that are the most interesting. And they gave me a list of all of the ones that mattered. And it gave me the opportunity to rank them. Oh, I do want a better loan manager. I don't care so much about these other features. They use that as a way to get customer feedback to drive their product improvements. So especially with digital interfaces, it makes it really easy to do these types of tests because you've got real-time communication with your customers. But what's really interesting about that example is Quicken didn't waste development dollars with features that their customers didn't want. They went right after the features that the customer most wanted, which is going to maximize their return on investment, which is a really terrific model. They didn't do a 6-month strategic plan to do that, by the way. So a marketing person probably came up with that in a couple of weeks.
Dimitri, quick question.
Yeah.
Are these principles applicable to service organizations, small nonprofits across the board?
Absolutely. Yeah, these things, the concepts of lean startup have been used for entrepreneurial ventures, but also for intrapreneurial projects. So individuals that are leading a team within an organization are very effectively using lean startup concepts to help do a better job with driving projects. So it can apply private sector, public sector. I'll talk a little bit about how people are using these in their personal lives as well. So it's, as I said, the best business tool I've ever come across. The other tool which businesses are using to modernize their internal project planning skills is what's called Scrum, or alternately called Agile. And I also believe this should be required reading for anybody in business. It's called The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. It's written by Jeff Sutherland, who created the Scrum process, also called Agile. This is a project management tool that's historically been used by software companies, but increasingly it's been adopted by project teams in many different lines of work, including in public sector and government. So there are some examples of governments using Scrum to improve outcomes. It has a dramatic impact. So the alternative to this is sort of the waterfall or Gantt chart approach to project management, which is sort of the legacy tools. So very quickly, what is the approach to using Scrum in business? Well, it eliminates long cycle project planning. Sounds familiar, right? So it's this idea that you could build a really complex Gantt chart to model every possible thing that's going to happen in your project. It pretends you know things you don't know, and you waste a lot of time and overhead with these types of approaches. So it eliminates that in favor of fast iteration, test, measure, and change. It's basically using lean concepts, but in a project planning application. It prioritizes customer value creation and feedback. So the priority is on what does the customer want, and getting feedback from the customer in evaluating those features. And the equivalent to the idea of MVP, or minimum viable product, is it eliminates waste in the sense that in most projects, 80% of the features are really never used. It's the 20% of the features that add the most value to your customers. And you can think of features as, a software product, it's obvious. It's, the point and click stuff that you're doing. But in your, if you're running a bookstore, what's a feature? Well, it's things that make the customer more likely to spend time browsing in your bookshop. It might be, adding, the way you do your merchandising displays and things like that. So what are the things that customers really care about? Scrum encourages you to focus your efforts on the 20% of the things that customers really care about and gets rid of all of the waste. The other thing it does is it utilizes cross-functional self-managing teams. So again, it gets away from this idea of using managers who have control and power. Managers are called helper servants is the term that they use. There's a lot of tradition around Scrum, and it's sort of an interesting set of vocabulary, but it really does empower people doing the work to make decisions and to self-organize. And it comes from the same lean concepts that came from Deming. So it's just applying scientific method to an organization using rigorous data and analysis to make decisions rather than guesswork. There's tools like Trello. This has become a mainstay of the project management technique. What Trello does is it strips out all of the ugly, complicated stuff in project management, and it gets it down. It actually came from Post-it notes on the wall. And there are a few columns here. You can't read it on this display, but it says one column is to do, the second column is doing, and the third column is done. And each card or a sticky under that column is stuff that you're working on. The idea here is that this is tightly intertwined with Scrum. The idea is the tools now reflect the way people actually work. It doesn't force them to work in ways that the tool wants them to work. How do people actually work? They know what's in the backlog, what they need to work on, what are they doing today, and then what's done. And you move your card from one column to the next. This has really simplified project management in my organization, and people, the personal anecdote is people are using this to manage their honey-do list at home. I've got one at home that manages my grocery list. I've got boat projects that I use this to plan. So it helps you prioritize. You move things to the top of the card if they matter. And if they don't matter, you move them down to the bottom and you just don't worry so much about it. So it just strips out all of the nonsense and it gets down to the way people actually work. It's being embraced more and more by startups for sure. So all startups are using these tools. legacy organizations are starting to adapt to them as well. These have made my business more successful because it reduces waste, and it's allowed us to be a lot more agile. So the implications for skill sets in the workforce are really significant. I talked about how the workforce is changing. Focus is much more on what we have historically called soft skills. So collaboration and teamwork is key, of course. Communication skills, problem-solving skills, a reliance on empirical evidence, not opinions or guesswork. You know, how often do we hear, "I think that," therefore, well, it doesn't matter what you think. What matters is what the customer thinks. So trying to get ego out of the process is huge. Risk-taking and a tolerance for failure. Boy, we don't teach our kids that in school, do we? So we've got to learn how to accept risk, and the model here front-loads your risk. It says, try your riskiest things first, because if you spend a year building out your product and then you've backloaded all of your risk and you find out at the end that you can't deal with it, you've wasted that whole year. So try the hard stuff first, and if it fails, you've learned something from it. Comfort with ambiguity, that's a challenge. You know? So how many of our folks say, I just want to know the answer. I just want to fish, I don't want to be taught to fish. It's a huge challenge. So in the workforce, workers are struggling with this. These are the skills that are needed to be successful in the marketplace, and employers are having a hard time finding people with these skills. The way we're dealing with it is we're training our people to upskill, and there are lots of great training programs out there, and most of them are free or very low cost. But as a legacy 30-year-old organization, one of our biggest problems is that we're 30 years old, so we've got 30-year-old skill sets. So we need to modernize those in order to be successful in the marketplace. And the anecdote here, I really like this model. It talks about I-shaped skills versus T-shaped skills. So the old model was I-shaped skills, meaning you wanted workers that had really deep expertise in one particular functional area. So you wanted somebody that was really, really good at programming a computer or at digging a ditch, whatever it is. Now what's really relevant to the marketplace are what's called T-shaped skills. So you still need that deep expertise in some functional area in order to get grounding and education. But you need to broaden that skill set with that T bar that gets into some of the soft skills, the communication skills, problem solving, and those are the things that are really going to help people be successful in the workforce. So the idea that you can sort of be in your own silo now, making decisions just in your own functional area, that has really changed. Teams have to reach across these silos. They need to become much more cross-functional as we start to eliminate more of those sort of wasted layers of management and organizations. And to become more effective, workers really need to embrace the concept of ambiguity, being more comfortable with decision-making, and things like that. So there's a lot of research online and a lot of discussion online about workers seeking training to become more relevant in the workforce, and a lot of them focus around these things. So if you're struggling with some of the same problems that we have with worker productivity and relevance, this is where we've been coaching for folks to go. So I know I only have a couple of minutes left, so what I want to do is very quickly talk about how we've applied some of these concepts in my organization, Global Z. I don't have time to get through all my slides, but I'm going to give you the high points, and then I'm going to move on to Q&A. So the blue line here represents our gross revenue growth over the last, I think this is 20 years. The yellow line represents the component of that gross revenue that was the business that we've been doing for most of our 30 years. So at one point, we started to hit a peak, and then we flattened, and then we really started to decline. So how do we keep our growth going? The green line reflects new lines of business that we pivoted into because we knew that our previous lines of business were really at risk. So the only way that we were able to keep that total trajectory going is we essentially had to abandon the thing that we knew we did really, really well and had great experience in the marketplace and great visibility, and try some new things and figure out, and it took us a while to figure it out, but that's what's really helped us propel our growth on an ongoing basis. So this takes guts, because you have to turn your back on some things that you know, your comfort zone, things that you really know well. And I'll just talk briefly about what that is, and then I'll let you folks do the talking. So Global Z exists because we know how to get these things into one of these things. So it's really hard to see this chart from where you are, but this is an address entry form. It's got 2 lines of address, a city, a state, and a zip code. And what these things are here, these are international addresses that don't look anything at all like that. You can't fit these international addresses into that template. And so what you have is anybody that's collecting global data, anything outside of the US, basically has messy data because of the challenges that this type of data mapping causes. So global marketing organizations and other organizations have found that they have a major data quality problem. And it's driving cost, and it's making it harder for them to keep in touch with their customers. So we know how to deal with that. We've been doing it for 30 years. We know everything there is to know about global address data. And starting back in 1991, we used our expertise to basically help marketers deliver marketing communications to their customers. So we made it easier for a marketer to get a catalog delivered to a customer in the UK and make sure that it got delivered, and make sure that they only got one catalog and not 3. Well, what happened in roughly 1998, 2000 is that e-commerce really started to eat into direct mail volumes, and marketers started to shift away from direct mail and move more of their marketing dollars towards e-commerce. We're not an e-commerce company, we don't know anything about it, so we had to find something else to do in order to sustain our business. And so what we've been testing since that market shift started in 2000 and really hit hard right after the recession of 2008 is we shifted our business into a new space, which is what's called Customer 360 Master Data Management. I'm going to talk very briefly about what that is. So in the old world, customers touched businesses in only a couple of different ways. You might have done business with them in a retail store, and you might have done business with them through the mail or something like that. But all of the customer data was stored in one place, and so it was really easy for the retail company to know a lot about who their customers are. In the modern age, there are lots of different customer touch points. So think about how many different ways you touch some of your favorite brands, apparel brands. There's e-commerce, there's retail store, there's channel partners, there's loyalty programs, there's myriad ways where you can interact with these folks, customer support. All of these systems are siloed, and they don't talk to each other. The way I like to describe it is if you know anything about the electronic medical record system and the healthcare system, when you go to your primary healthcare provider, they have one view of your data. When you go to a specialist, they have a different view of your data. When you go to another practitioner or the ER, they have a different view of your data in the electronic medical record. None of those systems talk to each other. So none of your healthcare providers really understand who you are as a patient, so they can't really treat you. They certainly can't treat you holistically. Retailers have exactly the same problem. All of their data is siloed in IT systems across the globe that don't talk to each other. And basically, we take our expertise in data cleaning, which we used to use to get mail delivered, to solve this problem, which is called Customer 360. So we take all of these transactions that are coming to the retailer from all of these different silos, data silos all over the world, and we clean it, and we create cross-linkages between these different customer attributes, and we bring them all together to show them you don't have lots of different customers, you have one customer with lots of different touch points, which make them actually a very much more valuable customer for you. And the process of Customer 360 makes for a better user experience or a customer experience on the part of the customer as well. If you think about Amazon is one of the best companies in the world at this. If you buy product on Amazon, they recommend products that other buyers that have your interests are also interested in. That can make for a more efficient experience for you, where you're not wasting time looking for things that are not of interest to you. The better job they can do to predict your behavior, if it's done in a responsible way, can actually be really meaningful for consumers. So we've been seeing a lot of growth in this business, and it's been a successful pivot for us. But I'll just close by saying that one thing I know is that there's a shelf life to this business strategy. 10 years from now, I'll be doing something different. I don't know what it is yet, but you can bet I'll be using Lean to figure out how to make that pivot. So hopefully 10 years from now, I'll come back and I'll talk about what that is. Thanks for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
No one else has one. You mentioned a couple of training programs out there, almost free or free. Can you give a couple examples?
Sure. So there are 2 resources which are paid resources. One is LinkedIn Learning, and LinkedIn acquired that from, I forget what the other provider was, but it's a really, really good tool that's got deep content in many different verticals, and it's not free, but it's practically free. So look at LinkedIn Learning, and there's another tool called Udemy, which is spelled Udeme, and that one actually has more market share than LinkedIn Learning and is heavily respected in a lot of fields. Free tools, there are tons of them out there. I went through Stanford's computer science department, ran a Java course their entire curriculum is online through Stanford. I wasn't matriculated, but I learned how to write Java code by going to Stanford online. There are tons of those types of resources out there as well. Yeah.
Being that you got your ear to international business, what's your prognosis for the economy here in the United States in the next couple of years?
Yeah, great question. It sounds like a political question. So I think, we're going through some major transitions. I have my personal political views, which I won't share here, but I think part of the answer is we have to accept, first of all, that we're not growing at double digits as an economy, and there are some shifts that we need to make, and some of our systems are not exactly designed well to deal with some of those shifts. So there's a lot of discussion out there around the role of commerce, the role of business, and the role of free markets, and whether it's working for everybody. And we're seeing that play out for sure. And I think that's a good question that we should be having a discussion about. I think the single most important thing that we could be doing right now is investing in education. I really think what's Let's Grow Kids is doing to try to move into 0 through 5 education for all kiddos. I just couldn't agree with that more. My kids started pre-K at 3, and the data is so clear that it tracks the outcomes. I think the only way we can maintain our competitive edge long term is we need to really improve our education system. We need to be willing to invest in that, in my opinion. Yeah.
I'll follow on with that. Education, because it's one of the things I've been talking about lately. How are we going to get a good education, public education system, when we have an administration and a president who doesn't care about that?
Yeah. Well, these things are, there are shifts in policy, of course, when we, move from the left to the right in the administration, and in my opinion, neither side has the perfect answer. I personally believe this, so the devil's in the details, and I'm always leery of going to a business meeting where you have 20 business people around the table saying, you know what the problem is? It's education, and we're going to build a task force to solve this problem. And why I'm leery about that is because business people don't really know that much about education. There are experts out there that do. So I think part of it is if I want to solve a problem, and Putnam's a really good example of this. When we tackled the Putnam problem, we said we don't know anything about the real estate business and we really don't want to. But we know somebody that does, let's go hire them. So we brought in Bill Colvin and the project team. I really think that there's a place for policy experts in improving our education system. And I think that we need to do much more to focus on again, data. So there are examples of Scrum and Lean being used in educational systems to study what's working and what's not. We tend not to be very empirically focused when it comes to how we modify our education system, and I think we can make a lot of improvements there. But I also think there are some value challenges here. So, the anecdote I always use is, do we value education enough as a society? I know that we say we do, but when we talk about the American dream, we talk about an immigrant who came to the U.S. with nothing in their pocket, and they worked really, really hard, and they made it. And nowhere in that discussion of the American dream is there the subject of education. So we know that it's important. And I know that meritocracy matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. And if we're going to have improvements in our education system and be competitive in the long term, I think we have to be willing to invest in that. Vermont's got a real problem. But the problem is because of teacher ratios and some of the declining student population. The way we fix that is we need to grow our population. It doesn't solve the policy problems, it's complex. So I don't know the answer, but I do think we need to value education much more and be willing to pay for it, in my opinion. Yeah.
Bennington Idea Fund.
Yeah.
How's that been going? Most people have not heard about that, so.
Yeah, so that project has been in stealth mode for the 3 years, I think, that I've been running it. Frankly, I took on a little bit too much when I started up the Lightning Jar, and I had to side burner Idea Fund for a little bit, but we're in the process of recruiting for a director for Lightning Jar, which I think we'll have in place by October, and then I plan to ramp the Idea Fund back up again. But the basic idea behind the fund is we get investors from the business community predominantly, and we build a fund which will fund projects. We keep the overhead really, really low, so we have a steering committee of folks that review applications, and these applications come from the community. And so it's anybody that has an idea that can affect people in a positive economic way. It could be a business startup. The types of projects we funded are things like, well, starting up a business, we did a few of those, up to $5,000 grants. We're doing grants and not loans because of the administrative costs. All the way down to a young woman who needed $500 to fix her car so she could finish her nursing degree. It's like a no-brainer, $500 investment to get this person into the workforce. It's just super simple. So that's the model. I wish I had more time to focus on it because I actually think it's the most important project I'm doing right now. But with Lightning Jar and Putnam and a few other things, I'm pretty much out flat. So ask me again next year.
Sure.
The question, I don't know if we still have time for another. Yeah.
So along the same lines, because we don't have time, I'll ask you after.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thanks again.